Hey there, my name's Mark McCartney and welcome to the What is a Good Life podcast. Over the last 3 years, I've interviewed over 200 people around this question, not to prescribe you with a universal answer, but to help you to find and define your own answer to this question, or at least to explore it. I'm hoping the guests' musings, explorations, experiences, and curiosities will prompt your own inquiry into what this question means for you. While I'm also trying to share with you what I perceive to be more genuine expressions of the human experience and indeed more meaningful conversations. Which brings us to this week and the 91st episode of the What is a Good Life podcast. And I'm delighted to introduce Andrea Hiott as our guest. Andrea is a philosopher and the founder of Making Waves, a private educational consultancy that works with individuals, businesses, and organizations such as EMI to explore the guiding philosophies that are at the core of our lives and actions. She is also an author and educator, holding degrees in philosophy of mind, neuroscience, and UNESCO World Heritage. Andrea has authored several books, including Thinking Small, and her work has appeared in renowned publications such as the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, National Geographic, and the San Francisco Chronicle. In addition, she hosts several podcasts, including Love and Philosophy and Desirable Unknown. In this captivating conversation, Andrea shares her journey with the question of what is mind. We discuss the importance of developing our ability to hold paradox, handle the intensity of our emotions, and navigate the challenges, joys, and fears that love can sometimes bring. We explore how our presence and attention can facilitate change in ourselves and in others, and the profound impact of sharing meaningful moments together. This whole conversation is deeply insightful, offering much to learn from Andrea's curiosity, wisdom, and reflections, which may help you to embrace the experience of being human more fully. Look, I enjoyed this conversation hugely with Andrea. It was a really deep exploration into the subtlety and nuances and intimacy of paying attention to this life. So I think you're going to take a lot from this conversation. And if you enjoy this episode, please like, share, and subscribe if you're on YouTube. And please continue to leave your lovely reviews if you're on the podcasting platforms. Please check out the show notes below if you'd like to check out more of Andrea's work, as well as ways for contacting me, whether that's for some one-on-one coaching to exploring new ways of being and self-inquiry, whether it's to join my weekly and free silent conversation groups, or to find out more about how I can help your leadership teams develop greater trust, communication, and connection. And you can also find a link to the podcast newsletter where you can read about the reflections that these conversations that you're listening to have evoked in me. So that's all I have to say for this week. I look forward to carrying on the conversation with you next week. And so without further ado, the 91st episode of the What is a Good Life podcast. Andrea, thank you so much for joining me today on the What is a Good Life podcast. Since becoming aware of your work recently and a big admirer of the process that you're taking, I'm very grateful to have you here today.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks for inviting me. It's great to be here. Big fan of your project.
Thank you very much. So as I tend to kick these things off, it is with the question of, is there a question you're trying to answer as you move through life?
Yeah, what is this? What is this? Us here connecting like this. I think I think even on my website, I say something like, there's one question I've been trying to answer for a while, and it's like, what is mind? I'm not sure how I phrase it, but I think for a long time, as long as I have sort of memory of asking questions, I've been trying to ask something like that question of like, how does this happen, right? How do we connect here, share something, and it feels internal and external at the same time, and it is. I remember just trying to think about this a little bit for today. Earlier today, I was thinking about when I was a kid. I was trying to remember like the first time I sort of asked that question, or something like that question. And I remember a few times, but one that's really strong is when I actually wrote it down, was when someone passed away in my family when I was a kid. It was my grandfather, actually. And we were staying with my aunts, and I couldn't sleep because I felt really confused about what had happened. It was like the first time I'd really been confronted with someone I loved was there, and then they're not there. And I was still pretty young. I don't remember exactly the age, but like maybe 8 or 9. And I remember sitting in bed, and it was the first time I sort of wrote to try to understand something. I had this little journal I got for Christmas, and I was like trying to write like what's going on here. And I made up this little poem, the thing I remember that's definitely in it is like, how does something hurt so much that we can't touch, or that we can't hold or reach out and touch? It was something like that. I think it rhymed. And I think that's the same question I'm still trying to answer. And not only like how can something hurt, but how do we have all of this thought, emotion, feeling? It's all kind of continuous, but we don't see it. We can't hold it, or can we? Because even then, when my grandfather passed away, he was gone, but he was still there. Do you know? So there's that. That's the question. I think of it now almost as like, how do we hold the paradox? Something I think about a lot, of how do things feel two ways at the same time? And that is so potent, that my grandfather was there and not there, that I could feel the pain, but I couldn't hold the pain in my hands. Like, you know, so I think something relative to that is what I've been trying to answer. And I studied philosophy first to try to answer it. I read tons of books. I studied neuroscience to try to answer it. I studied heritage, like how we design our spaces, to try to understand that. But I really think that question is the guiding question. And we could call it mind or consciousness or emotion. I think I don't see like a huge separation between all those words in the way a lot of people do. But in really general terms, how is something inside and outside at the same time? And what is that? Like, how are we doing this right now? How are we connecting together?
That's an absolutely gorgeous kind of curiosity or investigation. I also briefly thought, I think at 8 or 9, I was collecting football stickers
Oh, cool.
for a magazine. So you've had some degree of a head start on this inquiry on me. And in your sense, then, like, and I know it's a memory, an event that happens. What was that sense of? How can something feel so strong and it, like, I almost can't hold it, or it's not tangible? Could you just, I'm not trying to say you can put yourself right back there, but just to even
No,
elaborate on
because
that sense.
yeah, no, it's good you picked up on that, because I think there is that with me, or I mean, it could come through collecting football stickers too, by the way. I mean, I don't think it's that different from having like something you're kind of obsessed with, when I was a kid too, that you have these things which you care so much about, and almost like sometimes you feel like you can't hold it, you can't handle it, you can't, it's too much, and that's not a completely different feeling from how I felt with the pain. So sometimes it's pleasure, or sometimes it's excitement. For me, I get so curious about things, or so excited about ideas, and it's almost like I need to talk about them. I need to read, because it's so much that feels like it needs to be. It's almost like flowing, and you need to let it flow, right? Not block it up. So when I think about that particular moment, it was confusion. I mean, I also remember thinking my parents were hurt very much. Like, I hadn't seen them hurt so much, and they were very sad. And so, as a kid, when you see your parents or sort of cry and sad, then the pain is even more. I don't think I understood yet that my grandfather was like gone, or I didn't, like, all of that didn't make a lot of sense yet. I mean, who knows if it even makes sense now, but I could see that people were in pain around me, and I felt that too, but I didn't understand it, and it was too much, right? So I think through writing, getting that out, it just helped me feel better. And then, I mean, it was a real confusion. That's the wonderful thing about being a kid, is you're so excited about whatever it is, and you can't really hide it. If you love football, or and also with something that's hard for you, I couldn't really hide it. And I think I read that poem to my parents in the car or something, and my dad like had to pull over. I remember him stopping the car, and they were both kind of emotional, and I was like, okay, what did I do? But there was something about that process, because I was a pretty shy kid, and there was something about like writing something down and sharing it that helped me to do exactly what you just brought up, not to get overwhelmed, because that's been like something in my life where things do feel incredibly strong at times, and I need to figure out how to handle that, or let that flow through me in a way that's healthy.
Yeah.
And I think that's connected to that same question too, of what is all this? Because that makes me very excited too. And I find life so kind of overwhelming, that it exists, and I can there's many different ways that can go, whether it's loving sports or whether it's like loving these big ideas. But yeah, it does have something to do with capacity. How much can you handle, whether it's pleasure or pain? And how do you share that and release that and not get tied to it in a way, or addicted to it, or kind of like as if you need that, you know? I think as we get older too, like that can become kind of an issue of wanting to recreate certain feelings or stimulations, or trying to, you know, get away from things by doing so. So it's all connected in a way, but I don't know if that makes sense to you.
Oh, it completely does. I think in because I did over 120 interviews before this podcast began, just privately, and so often people had the sentence or sentiment, "Does that make sense?" or "If that made sense," and the way you're just talking, or even just the different elements that you're pointing to, like it really, I almost kind of have like some sort of peace in the overwhelm, if you get me. Like there's a way you're describing it, like that it's, if we look at it from so many different points of view, or there's so many different experiences, or, you know, someone is here and they're not here at the same time, that there's some sort of like, I don't know, just peace in looking at it. I don't know what, like if that resonates with you at all, but there's just something to this. Like it's all like the question of why are, like, what are we even kind of doing here, or what is this? Like it's so, it just feels so huge that I can almost just like feel it, rather than even than try to resolve it, if you get me.
I like that. It's like, I think what you just kind of showed is how you can use it as almost like a portal to just be present,
Yeah.
you know? And that reminds me of certain practices, Buddhist practices, or even certain kind of exercises and things where you get in the flow, or you're just present, or but that question can be that kind of like a portal into that, right? What is this? Because you just actually, what is a good life is even kind of a way of evoking a kind of presence, you know? Like you can kind of sit with it all and have enough kind of distance from it, but also be involved with it at the same time to be able to ask that question. And I think the more you can kind of cultivate that in whatever way you cultivate it, whether it's taking a walk or doing meditation or having conversations, you know, you and I, maybe that's one way we find presence, or yeah, ask that question in different ways. Yeah, I think a lot of what we're trying to do is maybe do that. And when people ask you, does this make sense? I think it's exactly related to all this I've been talking about, because it feels like we're so solitary and that we're inside of our bodies or our heads or something, which I don't think we are, but you kind of come into your awareness or into presence with that feeling. And then you wonder, is this what other people are experiencing? So does this
Yeah.
make sense to them too? Like,
Yeah.
and I think there's even also like just saying from why I asked you that. And you're right. People often ask me that too. Did that make sense? Did I answer your question? Yeah. The reason I kind of did is you almost feel not like you're talking so much, right? and you almost feel like you want to make sure that it was okay that you said all of that or something.
Yeah.
You know, to kind of acknowledge that you're not completely you know, just wanting your own perspective. You want to share something. So in asking, does that make sense? It's almost like me asking, tell me what you think. You know, I want to learn from you a
Yeah.
bit
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
that too. And that too is a way of us being here together, like me and you recognizing that we're here, and not, you know, me thinking about what I should be doing or stressing about something in the background. It's kind of just this sitting with where we are right now. Not an easy thing to do, right? Who was it, Pascal, who said like the hardest thing to do is sit in the room alone or something? I'm completely,
Mm.
it's a much better quote than that, but sitting with yourself and asking that question might be a little harder for some of us at first than asking it together, you know, or does that make sense, kind of, you know, through that lens.
You know, just you know, I know you mentioned the kind of the big investigations you've had into this, even in a sense of study. But even aside from even maybe what you were learning about it from, maybe courses or various education, are there other moments that kind of jumped out along the way, from that moment of your grandfather passing and kind of asking these questions? By the way, I just love the sense of your parents pulling over on the side of the road after you reading something. Like, I just think there's something so, I don't know, powerful about the investigation or the inquiry, or even the things that you were noticing at that point to cause that kind of reaction. But just from your point of view, then, just were there other moments along the way that seemed as striking as that?
Yes. And I'm glad you said that about my parents, because something I like thinking about that again, I realized how important adults are to kids in terms of what they prioritize,
Right.
because that was a really emotional, potent thing for me. It didn't even have to be my parents, but that some adults or authority figure kind of noticed or felt something that you felt, I just wanted to say that because I think, in our lives, we don't, as teachers, I don't know with your conversations, but a lot of the conversations I have, someone always speaks about some teacher or some mentor or some person who said one little thing to them. Maybe that's the only thing they said, that kind of set their life in a certain way. So, yeah, just to kind of bracket that, just to say, like, these moments where people really connect, especially between adults and kids, the kids remember, it's a huge, can be like a big turning point. And just to stay with that and other big moments, I think I did have a few moments like that with teachers where they kind of saw something that I hadn't seen about myself in me, and they sort of show you that, like, oh, it's wonderful, Andrea, that you saw this in this way. And that's, and then you realize, oh, other people don't see it that way or something. But I had a lot of those moments too with animals or something. The grandfather who passed away, actually, I think it was anyway, one of my grandfathers had a farm, and there were always animals around. And as a kid, I also have a lot of memories of, like, kind of just going away by myself through the fruit trees, or like there were these cows always everywhere, and sort of, I mean, as kids do, communing with a calf or something and thinking I'm sort of talking with it or something. And also having that moment of, like, what, like, okay, it can't talk, but it's looking at me, and you kind of share this space, and, like, what is that? That curiosity and that excitement of, I don't know if you ever had that, where you out in the forest or something. I have a few memories of kind of going where I wasn't supposed to go on my grandfather's land, like, because it went kind of far with all the cows, and there were some areas I shouldn't go so far because I'm too little. But when I did, or kind of going into these forests where I hadn't been, and I had a similar feeling of almost it's too much, but so exciting, and so, like, you want to explore more. Uh, I think just, like, to think about a theme that resonates in the way you were bringing up there, that's a theme that resonates, right? In different landscapes, whether it's having conversations with people, my parents or mentors or friends, or whether it's walking in the forest, or whether it's trying to figure out why this cow is looking at me in a certain way. There's like that, those kind of moments where you feel like, wow, there's a lot more to whatever this is than I understand. And that's really exciting. And also could be scary too. That's that kind of holding the paradox balance of, you don't want to get overwhelmed by it, but it can motivate you. It's a curiosity, right? A portal.
Yeah, I love. By the way, I love this sense of a portal, and even just as you were saying that, I had a memory of just laying on my bed with my dog, even just a year or two ago, and just looking at her and knowing how excited she gets to see me, or how much I enjoy her presence. And I'm just looking into her eyes and going, like, what are you even thinking or processing, or what is this life all about, that you and I have this bond? And you know, I've no real clear sense of even a language between us, like, at least not in any kind of structured sense, like more in a felt sense, I guess. But it's really, I don't know, there are so many moments in my life, especially these days, where I there's just this abundance of curiosity, and it's this strange, staggering thing of, like, it fills me with energy, and then almost this like, how do I hold it all, or not even
Yeah.
hold it, but just how can I be with it?
I know that feeling a lot. That's what I was trying to touch on earlier, and I know the feeling with the dog too. I have a dog who she was given to me in Mongolia when I was doing the Peace Corps. It was like the last thing I thought could have imagined, that I could take care of a dog in like negative 40 degrees weather, out in the middle of in Mongolia. But I've had so many moments just like you just described, where I think you can have it with any life form in a way, but
Yeah,
especially like with the dogs, it's just for anyone out there who's a dog lover, this, right? Like, you just get so close to them, like your bodies and your rhythms, and they're so loving and they're so giving. And at times it can just be like, how, how are we both so different? I think that was kind of the thing on my grandfather's farm too. You such different looking bodies, such, in philosophy we talk about embodiment a lot, and how much the body is relative to cognition and feeling. And you sit there with your dog on the bed, and it's like you're such different embodiments, and yet you feel so like close, right? And your dog knows you in a way maybe other people don't, like in a really pure sense, that doesn't need to be represented with words or images, the way we always try to do as humans. Um, but yeah, what is it about that can be overwhelming, right? It's I think we all feel it a lot, and it comes in a lot of ways. I wasn't kidding about like you collecting the football cards, because I've seen little kids get just so excited about their favorite baseball star or their favorite, like, these things really excite us.
mm,
And I think relationships can do that when you're in high school or you're in whatever school, and we say high school in the States, but you want to have that in your relationships in a way, or maybe people start doing other things like drinking or whatever to try to feel that connection, to get to a place of comfort, to feel what you could feel so easily with your dog on the, just to feel like whatever that is, like that someone sees you and cares about you. So I really think that it's a similar rhythm that a lot of us, in so many different ways, socially, intellectually, in our work, we're trying to get there, or we're trying to float in that space where we're present and we're sort of turned on, curious. And sometimes we get lost trying to get into that space or feel like we're worthy of that space, right? Prove to our peers that we're worth hanging out with, or whatever. So yeah, there's a lot of nested ways I think to like look at that, but I do think it's something that a lot of us want to get to, in whatever practices we're doing or work we're doing, is that feeling of being connected, and also stimulated.
yeah. It's funny you mention even just high school romance or something like that. And I was walking around with the dog a couple of days ago, and just seeing a young couple. I guess they were only 16, and just kind of remembering back to just like the intensity of certain moments, or the
Mm.
things that would seem almost so subtle now, that like we're just, that once again almost seemed too much. And not in the sense of like it overpowering, but just like it's almost like there's too much of a voltage going through the socket, or something to this effect. And it is
Yeah,
this
yeah.
weird balance then of like, just going back even to the original idea of what is mind, and then what is even mine, and what is shared. And even when you're just saying this internal and external component, and I don't know, even beyond this, like even what is reality, or do you know what I mean? But then even
Yeah, that's cool what you
it,
just said. What is mind and what is mine? Like I'd never
yeah,
heard those put together like that. And that's a very interesting kind of juxtaposition that you just did. Because yeah, my question was what is mind with a D, but what is mine is actually very connected, isn't it? Because mind isn't necessarily mine
yeah.
in a weird way.
I have a very good friend who's a Jungian psychotherapist, who works very genuinely with the sense of the waking life may be a dream as well, essentially, and like an engagement or an interaction. But I have a 1-year-old now, and when she was born, I was just talking to him about like a shared mind space, like he was proposing this, I guess, in a sense, and I was very much operating or communicating her with the sense that we were sharing the same, the same kind of experiences or same images, or we were just communicating in a different way. And yeah, I don't know, I find it very hard to, my felt experience of life is definitely that this is my life. You know, I'm not going to, like, there's deep connection in it, don't get me wrong, but it's this simultaneous thing, or maybe this paradox again of feeling deeply connected, and also it's a separate experience.
It's both
So
of the same.
yeah, which is, that's I think what I'm left with more often than not, is just it's both at the same time.
I think that's such a hard thing to hold, though. I mean, that's why I talk about holding the paradox. And a lot of the kind of nitty gritty stuff when I studied neuroscience, for example, was trying to explore how one part of the brain, for example, is necessary for things that seem irreconcilable. But what you just said, it's very hard to just sit in that space where you and your daughter are separate, and you're responsible for those separate spaces, or she's learning how to be, right? I mean,
Yeah,
you're still responsible for her space mostly, but that's what we learn, to kind of be responsible for our embodied space up to some point, and that's very important. But at the same time, you're never going to be able to disentangle what is hers and what is yours, in a sense, like, because she's giving you so much, right? As she's growing, changing you, and of course you're taking care of her and changing her, so the space is always shared, and it's never an answer of like either or, it's always something more complex. But how to hold that is, I think, very hard. It's something I feel like a lot of us are learning, maybe you too with your work, or with a lot of the people you've talked to, maybe you've seen it, but I feel like a lot of people whose work I'm interested in, or my own work, whatever, is trying to find a way to make that a little easier, to not look for everything to have a contrast, and to always think
yeah.
in beginnings and ends and either or. I think we think that way without noticing it, right? And it's hard to develop a way of thinking where things are more fractal, and things
Yeah.
are more like, shared, but at the same time a little bit more intense in the way we've been hinting at, in terms of meaningful. It's not, you can't just clearly mark off an answer and move on, in the same way of you and your daughter are going to be in a process, right? And that's
But
actually beautiful.
yeah, just when you said that, it just made me think of, is that because, just I'd be curious to get your perspective, like, is that because kind of there's nothing really that I can just pin in a wall and fix it there? Like, even the image I have of someone, or even the familiarity that I develop with someone, that can, it can even sometimes even hurt the relationship, because then I've got a consistent image of what they are, and I'm assuming that, or I'm projecting that onto the image or the person in front of me. And
Yeah.
there's some sort of, I don't know, there's even familiarity, if there's not like an openness to let go, or a curiosity about them anymore, that I'm actually almost dealing with a Polaroid shot, a snapshot of them, rather than the living person in front of me. And it's hard to leave yourself open to that, like that I
Yeah.
have nowhere really to just box somebody away, or that I could just put a label upon something and then that would be it. There's no more investigation here. There's no more inquiry, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, well said. I think that is exactly what's so wonderful, and also so scary, because,
Yes.
and also just hard, because that nuance is hard, because as we've been trying to say, like, both are there are patterns, right? There are regularities. There are things that are associated with you that continue through time and space in a regular, patterned way, right?
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean I can define you. And that doesn't mean, for example, you and your daughter, or me and my parents, we can, or any of our relationships, there are patterns and regularities to those that if we were able to look over time, continue. But at no one moment can we, like you said, put it into a snapshot form of this is the relationship.
Yeah.
And it's always changeable. But like you said too, and I think it's a good point, we almost want to do that because, like, the feeling of love we were talking about, it's overwhelming when you're young and it's so exciting, but it never gets really easy. Love is hard in a wonderful way because of that, right? Because you can't, you might be in the most beautiful place with the person you love. And it could be your lover. It could be also just a person you love. You want to care for example, that you can't control it, hold it. You can't keep it where it is,
Yeah.
because it's always flowing, and that's scary, isn't it? At least for me. I mean, love for me is so important and also terrifying in a way, or something I've really had to come to grips with, because I can't not love. Like, if it's my mom or my brother or my husband or who I would, my dog, all my friends, whatever. There's something about love that you have to let go and be
Yes.
vulnerable
Yeah.
in the way that you just said, because it's going to keep moving and changing, and you can't, for example, make everything better for your daughter all the time. So it's scary to let yourself love her as a living, moving, changing being in a living, moving, changing world. Yeah. And I think with good reason we try to make these snapshots of each other, and because it's too much for us to handle in a similar way where it gets overwhelming, so we just say that's dad, that's mom, that's child, and it helps us in a daily basis to like deal with all of this, right? Because in every relationship, if you're so aware of all of this, it's so intense. But it is, I do think we can now get to a point where we can understand those regularities and patterns and roles and the importance of them. And at the same time, like, hold the fact that we don't actually know those relationships. They're
Yeah.
moving and growing and changing. And weirdly and wonderfully, if we look at them with that presence, they actually can change and grow and move in a really exciting way. Like, if you're present with your daughter, which is not always easy as a parent, right? There's so much. But that being present changes that relationship's regularities over time. And so would if you're just thinking of everything else while you're sitting with her. You know what I mean?
Oh,
Yeah.
completely. Like the I broke parenting down to be something quite simple in a way before. Like I've mentioned on this, so I don't want to labor this, but I never read any books. I deemed that if I was present and I paid her attention, that everything would be fine. And it's kind of what I've done with my life as well. I've made a lot of, as we briefly touched on before we recorded here, like I don't have an absolute certain, even a sense of certainty around how this work is evolving. But if I am present and I pay attention, I can trust that whatever emerges will be enough to meet the moment, or at least to I don't mean data in the sense of like I'm being aware to accumulate points of data, but if with awareness, I think there is some absorption of just what is. And the more I'm aware of what is, I figure the better choice that I could make rather than not paying attention. And
Yeah.
there's something about this, like even just the way you were describing love there, there's an aliveness to it. And you're right, like it can be both scary and it can be both exhilarating. But I think the interesting thing is with let's say the Polaroid snapshot of somebody, the older that snapshot is, the more discontent I think there will be in the relating. If I'm not seeing you for what you are becoming or evolving into, the same courtesy or curiosity to extend to myself as well in that process.
Yeah.
Which to me it sounds simultaneous, like there's multiple feelings coming up for me around that observation, if you know what I mean.
About how we turn this on our own self, or
Yeah, or just even the sense that that's thrilling, exciting. It's also a bit of work, and I don't mean it in a very process-driven way. I have a very good friend who I'd say we have a very intimate relationship with. Like he and I have really deep conversations, and we bring up things in the space between us. Like, so it's generally, um, if there's some kind of friction or something, it's addressed. And even when that's done well, and even with my wife as well, even when it's done really well, we're like, wow, we handle that really nicely. It's still just like it's like my body just kind of has to settle down again, because we've gone to the edge of that vulnerability, or the edge of
Mm.
even the conversation and kind of expressing it in real time.
Mm.
And so even when I think and I'm really happy and the other person is happy even with how something has gone, I notice my body just needs to just chill out. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, or just
I do. Yeah.
processed all of these things, and it could almost be tingling, you know?
Yeah, we have to be really gentle, I think, with ourselves. And I do like that you brought up the relation to self, because I think everything we've been discussing also relates to the way that we think about ourselves. The way we talk to ourselves, the way we look at ourselves, so to speak, because something that came up when you were just saying all of that, and this is kind of hard to talk about, but I think a lot of us kind of live through these representations, or what you were calling snapshots
Mm,
now, even in the way we think about ourselves and our lives.
yeah.
That's a hard thing to pull apart, but I think something a lot of us are trying to do in our work, because you don't always know that you're associating yourself or others with snapshots. To, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, because we're all trying to do our best, and relationships are hard, and there's so much going on, and I think we're both lucky enough that we have the space and the safety to kind of step back and ask these questions. Some people don't, right? They're just so in life, depending where they are in the world, that it's even hard to kind of have this practice of taking moments and space and having conversation. So there's all kinds of different lives, is what I'm saying. But even in this life, where we're talking about it and thinking about it and concerned about it, it can be very easy to just fall into seeing people as the representations of themselves, like what you've seen on social media, or what certain images have told you are cool or not cool, or good or
Yeah.
not good, or even like good ideas, right? Or good books to read, or whatever. And I don't know, I think like that gentleness that you're talking about is really important, because it can be, even with our relationships with our wife, husband, these really intimate ones. Sometimes we can even be trying to create or fit that into some idea that we've seen somewhere. Like, oh,
Yeah.
I'm going to try to have this conversation with you because I saw it in this book or something. And, even that can become too constrictive. Like, maybe
Yeah.
that wants to go somewhere else that you haven't read about, that you have no image of, maybe,
Yeah.
right? So I think the nuance and the gentleness, the layers of it, are really important, and that I'm glad you brought it up, because we are often trying to fit ourselves into molds without even knowing that we're doing it. Um, and yeah, to really just kind of look at the situation and look at the other, and feel it. Gosh, it's not easy, right? And doesn't when you do it, doesn't necessarily fit to anything that you've seen before. That's the weird thing. Also, as you were talking, I was thinking, I try to think of all of these relationships as paths instead of snapshots, because the snapshot, I think, we're so used to. Like, we try to put things in images or sound bites or tags, or
Yeah.
all these representations, word based or image based. In a path, you can't do that, because like our lives, whenever you were born, from that moment till now, you've had this kind of path through time and space, and everything you say in this moment comes from that path. So I need to remember that, right? And that path is really unique, and everything everyone said to you, every place you've ever seen, every touch, everything, right, has sort of given you who you are now, in a way, or and vice versa. And when we remember each other as that, like that, it becomes, I think, a little easier to not think through the snapshots, because
Yeah.
doesn't the world sort of like almost habituate us to think through snapshots right
Oh,
now?
completely. Yeah. It's I listened to this poet being interviewed, David White, and he said the question, I think, I'm not sure if he was quoting somebody else, but it was from the interview that he was saying, how do you know you're on your own path? And because it disappears in front of you. And there's something
wonderful.
about that, like just not necessarily saying that it's one step into the dark after the other, or it's almost like that the path emerges when you put out each foot in front of it.
Yeah.
But
You lay down the
that
path
is,
by walking it, I think, is a way that some people
that's a
say it in just
far
philosophy.
more beautiful way to describe it than, than me
Someone
fumbling
else said
around
that.
there.
Maybe Varela or somebody.
But there's, yeah, like that. I think we're so used to, we've got into such a habit of, I don't know, even this sense of a charismatic leader charting, predicting the future. And there's something quite comforting about the idea that we know. But at the same time, I think we're coming to the sense that there's something in us that yearns for the unknown, the uncertainty, the adventure, the sense of feeling alive. Like I think there's something even in me maybe not knowing some elements of where this work goes. That's what kind of makes the energy, or that's what generates continued energy or excitement for it. And I'm not trying to, like, it's really hard to say that I like that we can have no vision of something, because we're imagining things, we're trying to get a sense of things. So it'd be disingenuous to say that I'm not trying to seek it. But there's also, I know in just how I'm approaching it, that there is a true kind of acknowledgement somewhere that this is more aligned to the natural way of things, or the natural emergence of things. I wanted to ask something, just when you mentioned reference to time and space. I just wanted to know, in terms of even the overall question of what is mind, I was just curious from your perspective, the impact on time, or the relationship or impact upon each other of a sense of mind and time. Like, are they built into each other? Does mind change with time? Like, just these questions may not make any sense, but they're the ones that I feel compelled to ask right
Well,
now.
they're the questions that scientists and philosophers have been asking forever, right? What is time? What is space? Are they the same thing? There's some people who have kind of made arguments for those being very similar, or maybe two ways of looking at a similar process. I would sort of think of it like that, like two ways you can kind of measure a process that's immeasurable. But time, gosh, wow. I mean, memory comes to mind, because that's so related to time, or seems like it to us. And that's something I studied in the neuroscience quite a lot, and something that I feel is very much related to the way we move through the spaces of our lives. I don't know about you, but if you, like, for example, I was just let's say I just was in New York City because it's easier. When I walk through New York or Berlin, or somewhere that I've lived a lot of my life, every street corner almost is a memory if I'm in the right state of mind, or something will come to mind. Even if it's, for example, if I was listening to your podcast, walking around 45th Street, I can guarantee you, like 5 years later, when I walk around that same spot, I'll probably remember your podcast. That's kind of something interesting. I don't know if that happens to other people. I mean, if your podcast makes a big impression on me, which I'm sure it does, right? So, but the point is, memory is this beautiful, wonderful thing that's connected to kind of what we've been talking about. When something feels strong for you in your life, it's gonna kind of be a rhythm, or a note that sounds over and over again throughout your life. And I guess that's how we think of time. We think of time as we measure it, right, with numbers and so on and so forth. But how I really think of time is more like durée or something, or duration, or it's more like this, remembering, right? The almost like a time in music, right? Or melody or beat or rhythm, the way that over our life there are these particular emotions, interests that kind of speak to us, I think differently for each of us, right? It's part of our path in life that different things resonate. But for me, the time is almost like the music of what things resonate most and how you turn your attention to them. And when you look back through your path, like to stay with that, I think the time is a matter of that music, right? Those things that have resonated and that you've noticed and that you've given your attention to over all those many geographies and landscapes. And I mean those like physical ones, like the city I was describing, but also the books you've read, the movies you've watched, the music you've listened to. As you're doing that, that's taking time, that's
Yeah.
your life, but it's also adding time because it's adding these kind of notes that are going to resonate throughout your life. Also with our relationships, right? When we have these moments that are really meaningful for us, they add. They for me that's the time, because when I have a meaningful conversation with my partner, then something has resonated there that's going to carry me in other situations. So for me, time is like this kind of this remembering that happens in each moment, where in every moment that we're experiencing something, we're also sort of ringing the music of all these other experiences we've had in the past.
I love the sense of it being kind of remembering, and there almost being like it's setting there's a rhythm to it, or just you're even talking about the notes. Just you said something really beautiful there in terms of you may have a conversation with your husband and something in that resonates, and then that carries you. Could you give me a sense of just that, like, or even just
Yeah,
elaborate further on it?
I'll try. I mean, I haven't thought about it much, but I think what I'm trying to say is, you asked at the beginning, what are these questions that we have? And there are things I think that drive us in life, and it doesn't necessarily always come in the form of a question, but there's things that interest us that get our attention, and if we pay attention to that and we try to look at it with presence, then it's continuous, I guess, in the way that time and space and music are kind of pointing to the continuity of a process. So when I have a really deep conversation, or even doesn't have to be that deep, could be with my partner, my husband, or it could be I go into a store and for whatever reason I happen to be very honest with someone about something and they respond, because it happens like that too. But when there's these conversations, when you share something through the words that you create, or maybe you draw something, or maybe you make a podcast, whatever, write a book, but it happens especially in conversation. If there's a moment where you're sort of present together and you're able to articulate something that you feel expresses something meaningful, and the other person is able to be there and actually receive that and also give you an authentic response, I just think everything after changes in a way,
Hmm.
subtly, but
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
the space opens in a different way. It's so much more becomes possible. I mean, it would depend on what we were talking about, but I guess, for example, if I've not seen that I said something about certain teachers, right, who notice something in you. I think that's a good example of it. If you're having a conversation with someone who says, you really understood that that person was feeling sad when I didn't, and thank you for that, or something. Like, you didn't maybe notice that about yourself, but after that person has shown you that you did that, then you kind of are aware of that in a way, and maybe you'll carry that with you in your life, such that you realize, oh, like, just by being noticing how another person felt had a good effect. It changed, it helped people, so maybe I'm going to do it again. you know I mean, there's all sorts of little examples of that, of how we're each sort of tweaking each other's path through these authentic moments of connection. And again, they don't have to be some like amazing, mind blowing, like, wow, you've just told me the secret of the universe. It could just be very subtle and small, where you just realize that a little bit of care makes you feel good and the other person feel good, and you carry it, right. It's changing your habits and your rhythms and your patterns in the way that we've been talking about.
Oh, that's such a gorgeous sense of authentic moments or engage like points of contact tweaking each other's path.
We do it all the time, don't we? I mean,
Yeah.
it's kind of amazing how much we do influence one another, and how I keep kind of bringing up these chance encounters, but I think those matter a lot. You know, if you're rushing to the airport and stressed or something, but someone takes a moment to do something nice for you, you might get out of that stressful mindset that you're in and just be like, what am I doing? Like, life is okay. You know, like this person just showed me, just opened up another space that I wasn't in, but I can now fill that space, like just the space of humanity connecting, right? Not rush, rush, rush kind of. Do you know what I mean? Like there's these
Oh
little kind of
yeah.
interchanges that can really switch your way of being in the world in that moment. Yeah, I think that's so potent and so rich and so overlooked in a way, you know.
What do you sense is that where do you just get a sense of where our sense of being is kind of emanating from? There's like this lovely, even just as you were saying that, and just the somebody else opening up the space for you to almost get out of this stress in that moment, tweaking each other's path. Like for me, when I'm hearing all these things, like it feels like such a, almost like I get a sense of it like there being a shared overall, and like we're opening up portals or possibilities for each other. And to me, then that almost seems like a shared interest or a shared motivation of what mine could be, or something of that nature.
I think you brought up Jung earlier, so that kind of goes
Yeah.
towards that kind of stuff. I think a lot of people, though, have tried to talk about that. And I think for me, it's important to bring up this idea of holding the paradox again,
Mm.
that it's not that everything is all shared and it's one mind, that we all have the same mind and we're just swimming in the same mind. But it's also not that we're all trapped in our heads and not connected to one another's what we call mind.
Yeah.
Um, and I think the way to maybe think about how to hold that paradox is something that we already brought up a little bit, which is these representations. By that, I mean external things, the way we create objects, books, images, sentences, social media, posts, all this stuff as means of trying to express our experience of that paradox, our experience of what is shared and what is also unique to us, because it's always both.
Yeah.
And we're here to share what's unique to us, but we're part of this shared movement. So it's both at once, right? But then we get caught up in all those weird representations and images and trying to kind of win that game. And understandably, I mean, that's the way the world has gone in a way. But it can also be the opposite of that. Instead of getting lost in that and feeling inadequate and feeling like it's a game and something we have to win, maybe we can do more what we've been trying to think about here is like use it as a way to connect, you know. Like these podcasts that you're doing is you're using representations. I mean, in a way you have to make videos and podcasts and you have to kind of market them in a certain way, or at least create a little image, right? So people kind of get an idea of what's the rhythm of this, and that's all great too. But it can be used in a way that's going to open doors between those two seeming worlds of inside and outside, or absolute shared consciousness and internal consciousness. And it can even kind of do this meta thing of helping us realize that we're all helping each other co-create both, you know, through conversations and through what we create and through all these representations, the way we share, we're actually changing both, you know. We're changing our inner world, just like what we just discussed with the conversation, for each other, right? That's very powerful. Like, you know, you go to hear someone talk, or you read a book, or you watch a movie, and you're changed forever. It's like, what? How can this be? But it is like that. But we're also creating, like, what are the parameters for what's possible? There's this Johari window thing. I don't know if I even say that right, but like, you know, more or less, like we can kind of see what's here now, but there's a whole known unknowns and unknown unknowns. And I think about like what's a desirable unknown that we are creating now through these conversations or through everything we create. We're also creating that, right? We're setting up like what your daughter's going to experience 30 years from now in terms of what's possible. So like what values do we think are important, and what do we want to talk about? What do we want to champion? What do we want to put our attention and our money and all these things towards? Those are kind of choices that we make that can be a way of joining those two seeming different worlds of where being is, because being is everywhere. But for you, your portal into that being is your body, right? And also, your unique gift to that being is your experience of space and time. It's a wonderful thing. Let's try to make you feel secure enough to explore that and give the best you can out of that, right? Like, let's try to create the conditions such that you can be in that precarious position that is love and all the stuff we've been talking about, and explore it and go through all the dangers, but also feel like, you know, not judged for doing that, and not as safe as possible, I guess. Like if we could all feel that, right, then I think that's where being is. It's in that, you know, it's in that, and it's the center is everywhere, you know, it's in each of us,
Yeah.
in the being.
I could have listened to that answer go on for a long time. There's so much in it, and just looking at the time, and I think there was so much in that, even around the sense of what is a good life, and just from everything we've been talking about, the sense of even this question of what is mind, what is this that I can touch, or that I can't touch, that but it feels so strongly like the idea of, even from what you were processing or thinking about at your grandfather's funeral or around that time, the importance of even just the reaction of parents or adults or mentors that you're talking about, the kind of the what the value of deep and intimate conversations can be, or deeply connected conversations, the value of presence and awareness of not holding life too tightly, like not looking at these snapshots, but like allowing life and all of our respective journeys to be a path rather than something that we're holding in time. And then even just there, what you're describing around this sense of being, and where that comes from, and what may allow us to, or give us the freedom to experience that, and not be too daunted by the uncertainty or sometimes the mystery of life. Just really curious, Andrea, to ask you the question of what is a good life for you?
I like it that you add the for you. That's really important, right? Instead of what is a good
That's
life. I'm glad you add that, because it's
yeah,
different for each of us, isn't it? And yet,
absolutely.
at the same time, like we've been talking about how I live my life and how you live your life, when we put add it all together, we're also creating parameters for how everyone can live their life. So it's fascinating. What is a good life for me? I think for me, a good life is being able to kind of clean the lenses, so to speak, between these seeming different worlds. Get out, trying to see clearly that inner, where I'm at in terms of my own path in space and time, how I've gotten there, but also to try to understand, like let myself get a little lost. I think you brought up that word before we got on, maybe, but interesting. We talked about paths. So finding yourself in a way, right? But also letting yourself be a little bit lost in the bigger being, because we can't know exactly where we are. But when we know ourselves well enough as a dynamic, changing flow, then I think for me, a good life is being in that space where I can give the most, where I can feel the most love, which, as we discussed, is not like it's a kind of a precarity of, because you can't make everything okay for the people that you love, so it's painful because everyone's going through their own stuff, but still holding that love, right? That's a good life for me when I'm in that space, and when I'm also philosophical, because for me that's like, that means philosophy is like the love of this curiosity and this exploration, so that I'm exploring that being that I'm lost in, and I'm finding ways to help others see other paths that might help them explore it in better ways. And for me, that really feels like a good life. Like when I'm in that place, and when I'm able to hold that space so others can fill it too, right? And let others hold it for me. That's part of it too, which can be even harder, right? But that's all part of the love and the philosophy, I guess. And that's a good life for me. It's a kind of clarity about my own precarity, my own mistakes, my own successes, whatever, and like not labeling those anymore, seeing it as a path. And how can that path best open up other paths in this being I'm lost in, I guess. Yeah, I think that's, for me, feels like a really good life if I'm doing that. In, of course, concert with all these other beautiful voices around. That feels like a good life. I think of that Tolstoy book, right? The death of Ilya Ilyevich, or what is it? Ivan Ilyevich? I don't know. You'll have to look it up. But I read that also when I was kind of young, too young to read it. But it makes me think like, yeah, you're going to one day be at the end of this particular path. Who knows what comes next? We all have different ideas. But when I think of a good life, when I'm in that place, if I've felt what I just described, and I felt like I've tried my best to be in that space and clean those lenses and open paths and walk my own, then I'm good. It was a good life.
I think there's something so important as well, even just in what you were saying, of just the sense of knowing yourself, and in whatever ways that might entail, or whatever standard labels that we might typically throw at it, but just a certain level of comfort in ourselves. It's almost like I don't want to say anchor, I don't want to make anything sound too fixed, but like it's from that point we can kind of trust ourselves to navigate and to cultivate so many of the things you're
That's a
talking
great
about
way
there.
to say it. Yeah, because I think a lot of life is trying to do that, like step back and look at your own self clearly and accept it, forgive yourself, or admit whatever you need to admit, just like see it clearly, right? There's so much freedom and relief in looking at your life clearly and not judging yourself, but also not hiding it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's then you can navigate better. The way you said it, I think, is a good way to say it, and that feels really good, like a good way to
Yeah.
be living.
Yeah, it's I love even the sense of that, like the joy and the satisfaction that can bring, and then also the difficulty to see our lives, or at least at the beginning of the unraveling or the revealing, how difficult or confronting certain elements of even ourselves can be to
It
ourselves.
is hard. It really is, but it's so worth it, and it's
Yeah.
and we need to help each other, right? And I think that's part of creating spaces where people can do that and feel it's going to be hard no matter how you do it, to look at yourself and to whatever to try to admit these things to yourself and to others, and but that's why we're here, and so much opens up beyond that once we can do that and help each other do that, right? And you doing it helps others be able to do it. So it's as we were saying, all these paths are connected in strange nested ways. So yeah, let's help each other navigate those, right?
Absolutely. Amen to that. Look, Andrea, thank you so much for taking the time with us today on the What is a Good Life podcast. I've enjoyed this immensely. So thank you very much for that.
Well, thanks for what you're doing. I really think it's wonderful that you're putting these questions in the world and giving people a chance to think about it and answer them. And thanks for inviting me.